We've got a critical system failure. We need to isolate the breach now.
The $17 million fortune was gone. Every single penny. And standing in the marble hallway of the mansion that would be seized by morning, Richard Ashford, once the most powerful real estate mogul in Manhattan, stared at the only two people who hadn't abandoned him. His wife, Patricia, sat weeping on their Italian leather couch. And 20 feet away, watching through the kitchen doorway, was someone Richard had barely noticed in 5 years. Daniel Miller, the 19-year-old son of their housekeeper. What Daniel would do in the next 72 hours would either save Richard's life or destroy what little he had left. But right now, nobody knew that. Not even Daniel. Richard's hands trembled as he loosened his silk tie. Just 8 hours ago, his lawyer had delivered the news. His business partner, the man he'd trusted for 23 years, had emptied every account, forged Richard's signature on loan documents, and disappeared to a country with no extradition treaty. The FBI was involved, the media was circling, and the bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for Monday. "We'll lose the house," Patricia whispered, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "The cars, everything." Richard couldn't respond. His throat felt like sandpaper. He'd built his empire from nothing, a poor kid from Brooklyn who'd clawed his way to the top. Now, at 61 years old, he was right back where he started. Worse, actually, because now he had enemies. The doorbell rang. Patricia flinched. Richard's jaw clenched. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Nobody rang their doorbell at 9 o'clock unless it was bad news. Through the frosted glass of the front door, Richard could see shapes. Multiple people. He recognized the outline of cameras. "Mr. Ashford," a voice shouted from outside. "Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you about the fraud allegations." More voices joined in. The press had found him. Richard stumbled backward. His chest tightened. Everything was spinning. He grabbed the wall to steady himself, but his vision was going dark around the edges. "Richard!" Patricia screamed, rushing toward him. He hit the floor before she reached him. The last thing Richard heard before everything went black was footsteps running toward him. But they weren't Patricia's heels clicking on marble. They were sneakers squeaking. Someone younger. Someone faster. Daniel. 3 months earlier, life had been completely different. Richard Ashford woke up every morning at 5:30 in his king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets worth more than most people's monthly rent. He'd drink his coffee freshly ground Ethiopian beans, prepared by his housekeeper, Grace Miller, while reading financial reports on his tablet. By 7, he'd be in his home gym with his personal trainer. By 8:30, his driver would take him to his office in Midtown Manhattan. He barely noticed the people who made his life run smoothly. Grace had worked for the Ashfords for 19 years, ever since Daniel was a baby. She cleaned their home, cooked their meals, and managed their household like a silent ghost. Richard passed her in hallways without making eye contact. When he wanted something, he'd simply say "Grace," and she'd appear, as if summoned by magic. He'd never once asked about her life. Never asked about Daniel, who'd grown up playing quietly in the mansion's back rooms while his mother worked 12-hour days. Richard had built his fortune by being ruthless. He'd torn down historic buildings to make room for luxury condos. He'd bought struggling properties for pennies and flipped them for millions. He didn't apologize for his success. In his world, there were winners and losers. He was a winner. Until he wasn't. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in late July. Richard's accountant called, voice tight with concern. "Richard, we need to talk about some irregularities in the offshore accounts." Richard had waved it off. His partner, Gregory Thornton, handled those accounts. Gregory was family, married to Patricia's sister. They'd built the company together. Gregory would never. But Gregory had. Over the next 6 weeks, the truth slowly emerged like a monster rising from deep water. Forged signatures, shell companies, money laundering. Gregory had been stealing for years, carefully and methodically. But recently, he'd gotten greedy. He'd taken everything and run. The FBI showed up on a Wednesday. Richard's lawyers worked overtime, but the news was grim. Richard's name was on documents he'd never seen, loans he'd never approved, deals that were clearly illegal. Even if he was innocent, and his lawyers believed he was proving it would take years. Years he didn't have. The banks moved fast. They froze his accounts, called in his loans, started seizure proceedings on his properties. His friends stopped returning calls. Business associates claimed they barely knew him. Even his own daughter, living in California with her tech billionaire husband, sent a brief text. "Dad, our lawyers say we shouldn't communicate during the investigation. Sorry." Within 8 weeks, Richard Ashford went from being worth $17 million to being worth nothing. Less than nothing. He owed money he'd never borrowed to people he'd never met. And through it all, Grace kept showing up to work, even when Richard stopped paying her, even when he snapped at her for things that weren't her fault, even when Patricia treated her like furniture. Daniel noticed everything. He was 19, taking community college classes while saving money for a 4-year university. He had dreams of becoming an engineer, but those dreams felt distant now, watching his mother come home exhausted every night, working for people who didn't even see her as human. Daniel had grown up in the shadows of the Ashford mansion. He'd learned to be invisible, just like his mother. But invisibility gave him a superpower. He saw everything. He heard everything. He'd been in the kitchen 2 months ago when Gregory Thornton visited late at night, thinking everyone was asleep. Daniel had heard Gregory on the phone in the study, voice low and urgent, talking about moving the assets and offshore transfers. At the time, Daniel didn't understand what it meant, but he remembered. He remembered everything. Now, watching Richard collapse in the hallway, Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran. "Call 911, he shouted at Patricia, who stood frozen, hands over her mouth. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Richard, checking for a pulse. It was there, but weak. Richard's face had gone gray. His breathing was shallow. "Mr. Ashford, can you hear me?" Daniel's voice was steady, calm. He'd taken a CPR class last semester, never thought he'd use it. Richard's eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. "You're okay," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure that was true. "Just breathe. Help is coming." Outside, the reporters were still shouting questions. Camera flashes lit up the frosted glass like lightning. Patricia finally moved, grabbing her phone with shaking hands. But she was crying too hard to dial properly. Daniel gently took the phone from her. He called 911, gave the address, explained the situation. His voice never wavered. When he hung up, he looked at Patricia. "The ambulance will be here in 4 minutes. We need to unlock the gate so they can get through." Patricia nodded but didn't move. She was in shock. Daniel ran to the security panel by the door and buzzed the gate open. Then he returned to Richard, who was trying to sit up. "Don't move," Daniel said firmly. "You might have had a heart attack. Just stay still." Richard's eyes focused on Daniel's face, really seeing him for maybe the first time ever. "Who?" "Daniel Miller, sir, Grace's son." Recognition flickered across Richard's face, followed by something else. Confusion. Why was the housekeeper's son helping him? Where were his real friends? His family? His business partners? But there was no time to answer those questions, because the paramedics were bursting through the door, equipment in hand, pushing Daniel aside. They loaded Richard onto a stretcher. Patricia climbed into the ambulance, still crying. And just like that, they were gone, sirens wailing into the night. Daniel stood alone in the empty hallway. The reporters had gotten their footage and left. The mansion was silent. He should leave too. His mom's shift had ended hours ago, but something made him stay. He walked slowly through the enormous house, turning off lights, locking doors. In Richard's study, he saw stacks of legal documents, foreclosure notices, bankruptcy papers, and there, half hidden under a pile of mail, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. A folder, an old folder, worn at the edges. It had fallen behind Richard's desk. Daniel picked it up. Inside were documents, old documents, from 19 years ago. He started reading. His hands began to shake, because what Daniel was holding would change everything. It would answer questions he'd had his entire life. Questions about his father, who his mother never talked about. Questions about why they'd always lived in the Ashford mansion, even though his mother was just a housekeeper. But more importantly, what Daniel was holding could either save Richard Ashford or destroy him completely. And Daniel had to decide which. The next morning, Richard woke up in a hospital room with tubes in his arms and monitors beeping around him. The doctor said he hadn't had a heart attack, just a severe panic attack. His blood pressure was dangerously high. He needed rest. But rest was impossible because 2 FBI agents were waiting outside his room with more questions. Patricia sat in the corner, exhausted and red-eyed. She'd been there all night. "Where's Grace?" Richard asked suddenly. Patricia looked confused. "What?" "Grace, the housekeeper. Is she?" "Richard, why are you asking about the help right now? We're losing everything." But Richard wasn't thinking about everything. He was thinking about the boy who'd saved his life. The boy he'd never bothered to notice. The boy whose mother had worked for him for 19 years. And he didn't even know her last name until last night. Miller. Grace. Miller. Something about that name bothered him. It felt familiar, like he should remember something important. But before he could figure out what, the FBI agents walked in, and everything else disappeared. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small bedroom in the tiny apartment he shared with his mother, reading the documents over and over again. His mother was working a night shift at a diner. She'd taken a second job since the Ashfords stopped paying her. She didn't know Daniel had taken the folder. He'd tell her eventually, but not yet. Because what he'd discovered was impossible. It couldn't be true. Except it was. The documents were legal papers from 19 years ago. Contracts, agreements, all signed by Richard Ashford and Grace Miller. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the other name on the documents, a name Daniel had never heard before. But that changed everything he thought he knew about his life. His hands were still trembling when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know what you found. We need to talk. Come to the mansion tomorrow at noon. Alone. Tell no one, especially not Richard." Daniel stared at the message. His heart pounded in his chest. Someone else knew. Someone dangerous. And suddenly, Daniel realized he wasn't just holding documents that could save or destroy Richard Ashford. He was holding documents that could get himself killed. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Daniel stood at the mansion's front gate at exactly noon, his backpack heavy with the folder he'd found. The estate looked different in daylight, emptier somehow, like a movie set after the cameras stopped rolling. The for sale sign had already gone up. Vultures moved fast in Manhattan. His phone buzzed again. "Come to the pool house." Back entrance. Daniel's stomach twisted. This felt wrong. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, go home, pretend he'd never found those documents. But he couldn't. Not now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. He walked around the main house, past his mother's carefully tended garden that she maintained even without pay, toward the pool house that the Ashfords hadn't used in years. The door was already open. Inside, sitting in a leather chair like he owned the place, was a man Daniel had seen before but never met. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit. He'd visited the mansion occasionally over the years, always meeting with Richard behind closed doors. "Daniel Miller," the man said, smiling like a shark. "Please, sit down." Daniel didn't sit. "Who are you?" "My name is Leonard Vance. I was Richard Ashford's attorney. Before all this unpleasantness." He gestured vaguely, as if $17 million vanishing was just a minor inconvenience. "You found something that belongs to me." It was in Mr. Ashford's study. "Yes, but it was never supposed to be there." Leonard's smile faded. "That folder was supposed to be in my private files. Richard's former partner must have taken it, left it behind when he ran. Very careless of Gregory. Very careless indeed." Daniel's grip tightened on his backpack straps. "What do you want?" Leonard stood up slowly, moving closer. "I want those documents. And in exchange, I'll give you something your mother has needed for 19 years. Money. Real money. Enough to pay for that engineering degree you want. Enough to buy a real house, not that sad little apartment. Enough to finally live, instead of just surviving." "How much?" $200,000. Cash. Untraceable. Daniel's breath caught. $200,000. That was more money than his mother would make in 10 years of cleaning houses and working night shifts. It was enough to change everything. Why are those documents worth so much to you? Leonard's expression hardened. That's not your concern. It is if you want me to hand them over. For a long moment, Leonard just stared at him. Then he laughed a cold, bitter sound. You're smarter than you look. Fine. I'll tell you just enough. He pulled out his phone, showed Daniel a photo. Do you know who this is? Daniel looked at the picture. A young man, maybe 25, with dark hair and an easy smile. He was standing next to a younger version of Leonard. No, that's my son, Michael Vance. He died 20 years ago. Car accident. Leonard's voice cracked slightly. He was Richard Ashford's first business partner, before Gregory. They were building the company together. Michael had big dreams, but Richard had bigger ones. Daniel felt ice spreading through his chest. What does this have to do with my mother? Everything, Leonard whispered. Because Michael Vance was your father. The world tilted sideways. Daniel grabbed the nearest chair to steady himself. His father, the man his mother never talked about. The mystery that had haunted his entire childhood. You're lying. Read the documents again, Leonard said. Really read them. Michael died 3 months before you were born. He left everything to your mother, his portion of the company, his investments, his future earnings. But Richard made Grace sign it all away. He told her Michael had debts, that the company was failing, that she'd be responsible for millions in losses if she didn't sign. She was 22, pregnant, scared, and alone. She signed. Daniel's hands shook as he pulled out the folder. He'd read the documents last night, but he'd been so shocked by seeing his mother's name that he hadn't processed everything. Now he read more carefully. Partnership dissolution agreement, rights and shares transfer, liability waiver. His mother had signed away millions, maybe tens of millions, given how successful the company became. Richard stole your inheritance, Leonard said softly. He stole your father's legacy, and those documents prove it. If they ever become public, Richard doesn't just lose his reputation, he loses everything. Criminal fraud charges, prison time, complete destruction. Then why haven't you used them before? Because I'm a lawyer, Daniel. I know how these things work. Richard would fight back. He'd drag your mother through court for years. He'd claim she was a con artist, that Michael never really loved her, that you're not even his son. He'd make her life hell. And in the end, even if she won, the legal fees would eat up everything. Leonard leaned forward. But now Richard has nothing. No power, no friends, no money to fight back. This is our chance. Give me those documents, take the money, and walk away. Let me handle Richard Ashford. Daniel's mind raced. $200,000. Justice for his mother. Revenge against the family that had treated her like dirt for 19 years. It was so tempting, but something felt wrong. If you just want revenge on Richard, why pay me? Why not just use the documents yourself? Leonard's jaw tightened. Because I need the originals. Copies won't hold up in court, and I need your mother's testimony. But if I approach her, she'll refuse. She's too scared of Richard, even now. You're the only one who can convince her. So you're not giving me money out of kindness. You're buying my cooperation. I'm offering you a choice, Leonard corrected. Take the money and help me bring down the man who destroyed your family. Or walk away with nothing and watch Richard somehow weasel out of this mess like he always does. He's good at that. Surviving. Thriving. While people like your mother suffer. Daniel looked down at the documents in his hands. His father's name was on every page. Michael Vance. A man he'd never met. A man whose death had shaped Daniel's entire life. I need time to think. You have 24 hours, Leonard said. After that, the offer expires. And Daniel? His voice turned cold. Don't do anything stupid like showing those documents to Richard. He's dangerous when he's cornered. Your mother has survived this long by staying invisible. Don't make her visible now. It sounded like advice. But Daniel heard the threat underneath. He left the pool house with his backpack still heavy, his head spinning, and his heart torn in two directions. Richard was released from the hospital that afternoon with strict orders to reduce stress. The irony wasn't lost on him. How exactly was he supposed to reduce stress when the FBI was building a case against him, his assets were being seized, and reporters were camped outside his hospital room? Patricia drove him home in silence. She'd barely spoken to him since his collapse. The distance between them felt like miles. When they pulled up to the mansion, their mansion, for maybe 3 more days, Richard saw someone waiting on the front steps. Grace. She stood up as they approached, wringing her hands nervously. She was 51, but looked older, worn down by years of hard work and harder circumstances. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford," she said quietly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know this is a bad time, but I need to talk to you about something important." Patricia walked past her without a word, heading straight into the house. Richard paused. He looked at Grace, really looked at her for maybe the second time in 19 years. She had kind eyes, worried eyes. She looked like someone who'd spent her whole life being afraid. "What is it, Grace?" "It's about Daniel, sir. He's been acting strange. I think he found something in your study." Richard's stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" "I don't know. But last night he asked me questions. About his father. About why we've always lived here. Working for you. Questions I couldn't answer because—" She stopped, tears filling her eyes. "Because I promised never to talk about it." Richard felt cold sweat break out across his forehead. "Who did you promise?" But Grace just shook her head. "I should go. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. Please forget I was here." She turned to leave, but Richard grabbed her arm. Not roughly, just desperately. "Grace, wait. If Daniel found something, if there are documents I need to know, please." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Something shifted in her expression. After 19 years of being invisible, she was finally being seen. But it was too late. "You should have asked me this 19 years ago," she whispered. "Before I signed everything away. Before I let you convince me. I had no choice." She pulled her arm free and walked away, leaving Richard standing alone on the steps of his dying empire. Daniel found his mother that evening at the diner where she worked her second job. She was wiping down tables, exhausted, her uniform stained with coffee and grease. "Mom, we need to talk." Grace looked up, and Daniel saw fear flash across her face. She knew. Somehow, she knew he'd found out. "Not here," she said quietly. "Come home after my shift. We'll talk then." But Daniel couldn't wait. He slid into a booth, and after a moment, Grace sat down across from him. "Tell me about Michael Vance." Grace's face went white. "How do you know that name?" "I found documents. Legal papers. Mom, he was my father, wasn't he? And Richard Ashford stole everything that should have been ours." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "Daniel, please, don't do this." "Don't do what?" "Don't ask why we've lived in poverty while working for millionaires. Don't ask why you've spent 19 years cleaning toilets for people who treat you like you're nothing." His voice rose, and other customers glanced over. He lowered it to an urgent whisper. "Mom, we could have had a real life. We could have had everything. We have each other," Grace said, reaching across the table to grab his hands. "That's everything." "It's not enough." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cruel. Daniel saw the pain on his mother's face and immediately regretted them. But he couldn't take them back. "I'm sorry," he said. "But Mom, don't you want justice? Don't you want Richard to pay for what he did?" "Justice?" Grace laughed bitterly. "Baby, there's no justice for people like us. There's only survival. Richard Ashford is a powerful man. He's not powerful anymore. He's broke, destroyed. Now's our chance." Grace shook her head. "You don't understand. Men like Richard don't stay down. They claw their way back up, and they crush anyone who got in their way. If we come after him now, when he's weak, he'll spend the rest of his life making sure we pay for it." "Or," a voice said from behind Daniel, You could let someone else do the crushing for you. They both turned. Leonard Vance stood there, smiling his shark smile, looking completely out of place in the rundown diner. Grace's face went even paler. You, she breathed. No, you promised to stay away. Plans change. Grace. Leonard slid into the booth next to Daniel. Your son found my documents. Now we can finally finish what Michael started. Get away from him! Grace stood up so fast she knocked over a water glass. Other diners were definitely staring now. Daniel, we're leaving, now! But Daniel didn't move. Mom, just listen to what he has to say. No, Daniel, this man is dangerous. He's not trying to help us. He's trying to use us. Use you? Leonard raised his eyebrows. I'm offering you $200,000. I'm offering you justice. I'm offering you everything Richard took from you. You're offering us nothing but pain. Grace's voice cracked. Michael is dead. Money won't bring him back. Going after Richard won't bring him back. All it will do is put a target on our backs. Mom, no. She grabbed Daniel's arm, trying to pull him out of the booth. We're going. Now. And you, she pointed at Leonard. You stay away from my son. I signed those papers. It's done. It's over. Nothing's over until Richard pays, Leonard said softly. You know that. Michael knew that. He was going to expose Richard's corruption, and that's why Richard had him killed. The diner went completely silent. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. What? Mom? Daniel looked between them, his heart pounding. What's he talking about? Leonard's smile widened. You didn't tell him? Grace, darling, you didn't tell your son how his father really died? It was an accident, Grace whispered. The police said it was an accident. His car went off the road. His brakes were cut, Leonard said. I have proof. I've always had proof. Michael discovered that Richard was committing fraud, cooking the books, stealing from investors. He was going to turn Richard in. And 2 days before he could, his car went off a cliff. He turned to Daniel. Your father was murdered, and Richard Ashford gave the order. Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The diner was spinning. His father, murdered. Richard Ashford, the man whose life Daniel had saved just last night. You're lying, Daniel heard himself say, but it sounded hollow. Am I? Leonard pulled out his phone, showed them photos, police reports, mechanical analysis of brake lines, witness statements about suspicious vehicles following Michael's car. Grace was crying openly now, her whole body shaking. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Daniel asked her. Because Leonard told me if I did, Richard would kill me too, Grace sobbed. He said I had to sign the papers, take the hush money, and disappear. He said it was the only way to keep you safe. So I signed. I took his dirty money, $50,000, to give up millions and stay quiet about murder. And I spent every day since then working for your father's killer because Leonard convinced me it was the safest place to hide. Right under his nose, where he could watch us. Daniel turned to Leonard, rage building in his chest. You let her suffer for 19 years? You let her work as a maid for a murderer? I was protecting you both, Leonard said calmly. Richard couldn't kill what he didn't notice. And he never noticed the help. His expression hardened. But now Richard has no power. Now we can act. Give me those documents. Testify about what happened. And I'll make sure Richard spends the rest of his life in prison, where he belongs. Daniel's head was spinning. Everything he thought he knew about his life was a lie. His father wasn't some deadbeat who abandoned them. He was a murder victim. And his mother wasn't weak or scared. She was a survivor who'd sacrificed everything to keep Daniel alive. And Richard Ashford, the man Daniel had saved, was a murderer. But something still didn't add up. If you have proof Michael was murdered, why do you need us? Why not just go to the police? Leonard's expression flickered. Just for a second. But Daniel caught it. The proof I have is circumstantial. I need the documents to show motive. I need Grace's testimony to establish opportunity. Together, we can build a case. You're lying, Daniel said slowly. There is no proof. You just want revenge, and you're willing to sacrifice us to get it. Daniel Leonard started, but Daniel was already standing up, pulling his mother toward the door. They burst out of the diner into the cool evening air. Grace was crying, Daniel was shaking, and behind them, Leonard Vance sat in the booth, his shark smile finally gone, replaced by something much more dangerous: rage. That night, Daniel lay awake in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the folder hidden under his mattress. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Not Leonard this time. "Daniel, this is Patricia Ashford. We need to talk. It's about your mother, and about what really happened 20 years ago. Come to the mansion tomorrow morning. Richard will be gone. It's not safe to discuss this anywhere else. Please, your mother's life depends on it." Daniel's blood ran cold. What did Patricia know? And why was she reaching out now? After 19 years of treating them like furniture, he wanted to ignore it, wanted to delete the message and pretend none of this was happening. But he couldn't. Because deep down, Daniel knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And before it ended, someone was going to die. Daniel arrived at the mansion at dawn, when the sky was still pink and gray. His mother was asleep. She'd cried herself into exhaustion after the diner confrontation. He'd left a note saying he'd gone for a run. A lie, but a necessary one. Patricia answered the door herself. No staff, no Richard. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair unwashed, her makeup smudged under red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Hurry, inside." Daniel followed her through the marble hallway into a small sitting room he'd never seen before. It was tucked away from the main house, probably used for private conversations. Patricia locked the door behind them. "Where's Mr. Ashford?" Daniel asked. "Meeting with lawyers downtown. He'll be gone for hours." Patricia sat down heavily, her hands trembling. "Daniel, I'm going to tell you something that could get me killed. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after watching what's happening." Daniel's heart pounded. "What do you mean, killed?" Patricia looked up at him with hollow eyes. "My sister was married to Gregory Thornton, the man who stole everything from Richard and disappeared. Except he didn't just disappear. He's dead." The room suddenly felt airless. "The police don't know yet," Patricia continued, her voice shaking. "But I got a call last night. Anonymous. They told me Gregory's body was found in a warehouse in New Jersey. Bullet in his head. All the money he stole? Gone. Vanished. Who killed him? I don't know. But whoever did it wanted that money, and they're cleaning up loose ends." She leaned forward. "Daniel, your mother is in danger. You're in danger. Because Leonard Vance doesn't just want revenge on Richard. He wants the money Michael left behind. The real money." Daniel's stomach twisted. "What real money?" "My mother signed everything away." "Not everything." Patricia stood up, walked to a bookshelf, and pulled out a hidden compartment Daniel would never have noticed. Inside was another folder, older than the one Daniel had found, edges yellowed with age. She handed it to him. "Michael Vance didn't trust banks," Patricia said. 3 weeks before he died, he converted $2 million into bearer bonds. Untraceable, unregistered. Whoever holds them owns them. No questions asked. Daniel opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were the bonds. Genuine, legal, and worth a fortune even 20 years later. "Why are you giving me these?" "Because they were meant for you," Patricia said. "Michael left them in a safety deposit box with instructions. If anything happened to him, the bonds should go to his child. Grace never knew about them. Richard never knew about them. Only Leonard knew, because Michael told his father where they were hidden. But Leonard couldn't access them. He needed proof that you were Michael's son. He needed Grace's testimony, birth certificates, DNA evidence. That's what he's really after. Not justice, not revenge, money." Daniel's mind reeled. $2 million. Hidden for 20 years. Enough to change everything. "How do you know all this?" Patricia's face crumpled. "Because I helped Richard steal the first fortune from Grace. I watched him manipulate her, threaten her, terrify her into signing those papers. I was 25, and stupid, and in love with a man I thought was a hero. But he wasn't a hero. He was a monster. Tears streamed down her face. I've lived with that guilt for 19 years. Watching your mother work herself to death. Watching you grow up in poverty. Knowing I could have stopped it. I was a coward, but I'm not anymore. She grabbed Daniel's hands desperately. Take those bonds. Take your mother and run. Get as far away from here as possible. Leonard will come for you. Richard will come for you. These men destroy everything they touch. Why would Richard come for me? He doesn't even know I exist. Patricia laughed bitterly. Oh, he knows. He's always known. Why do you think he kept Grace working here for 19 years? Why do you think he let you grow up in his house? He was watching you, making sure you never became a threat, keeping his enemies close. Daniel felt sick. All those years of being invisible. Richard had seen him the whole time. There's something else, Patricia whispered. The reason Leonard is moving now. The reason everything is happening so fast. Richard is dying. What? Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less. He didn't want anyone to know, but I found the medical records. She looked into Daniel's eyes. Everything Leonard has been waiting for. Everything he's planned for 20 years, he has to do now. Before Richard dies naturally, because once Richard is gone, all the secrets die with him. All the evidence disappears. Leonard loses his chance for revenge. Daniel's head was spinning. His father murdered. His mother manipulated. Bearer bonds. Cancer. Bodies in warehouses. I don't understand. If Richard is dying anyway, why does Leonard care about revenge? Because it's not about Richard anymore, Patricia said. It's about the bonds. $2 million is nothing to men like Leonard Vance. But the principle? The idea that Michael's son might inherit what should have been his grandson's? That drives him crazy. Leonard had a whole plan for Michael. Legacy, dynasty, empire. And Richard destroyed it. Now Leonard wants to destroy Richard's legacy in return. And that legacy, she paused, includes you. Me? I'm not Richard's legacy. I'm nothing to him. That's what you think. But Richard has no other children except our daughter, and she's made it very clear she wants nothing to do with the family business or the scandal. You know what that means? When Richard dies, everything, the debts, the lawsuits, the criminal investigations, it all dies with him. Clean slate. But if it comes out that he murdered Michael Vance and stole from his family, that stain never goes away. It destroys the Ashford name forever. Patricia grabbed his shoulders. Leonard is going to force you to testify against Richard. He's going to drag your mother through court. He's going to make your lives hell until he gets what he wants. And then, when he's done with you, when you're no longer useful, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Daniel pulled away, clutching the folder with the bearer bonds. Why are you telling me this? Why help us now? Because I'm dying too, Patricia said simply. Different cancer, different timeline, but same ending. And I don't want to die knowing I did nothing while history repeated itself. She smiled sadly. Maybe this is my redemption. Maybe it's too little too late. But at least it's something. Daniel looked at this broken woman who'd spent 19 years playing the role of the perfect rich wife while guilt ate her alive from the inside. He should hate her. She'd helped destroy his family. But looking at her now, he just felt tired. What should I do? Run, Patricia said. Take your mother, take those bonds, and run. Start over somewhere Leonard can't find you. Change your names, disappear. That's not justice. No, Patricia agreed. But it's survival. And sometimes that's enough. Daniel was about to respond when they heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway, a door slamming, footsteps on gravel. Patricia's face went white. He's back early. You have to go. Now. Out the back. But it was too late. The front door burst open. Richard's voice echoed through the mansion, loud and angry. Patricia! Patricia! Where are you? And with him, another voice. Calm, controlled, dangerous. Leonard Vance. They'd come together. Patricia looked at Daniel with pure terror in her eyes. "Hide," she mouthed silently, pointing to a closet. Daniel dove inside, just as the sitting room door flew open. Through the crack in the closet door, Daniel watched Richard and Leonard enter. Richard looked terrible, pale, sweating, barely able to stand. Leonard held his arm, supporting him, but his grip looked more like restraint than assistance. "Where is it, Patricia?" Richard demanded. "Where's the folder I kept in the hidden compartment?" Patricia's face was a mask. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me!" Richard lunged forward, but Leonard held him back. "Richard, please, your blood pressure." Leonard's voice was smooth as silk. "Patricia, darling, we know you took the bonds. We know you've been planning to give them to the boy. Just tell us where he is." "What boy?" Patricia's voice didn't waver. Leonard smiled. "Daniel Miller, Grace's son, Michael's son, your husband's victim." Richard's face twisted with rage. "He's not a victim. He's a leech, just like his mother, just like his father was." "Michael was your best friend," Patricia said quietly. "And you killed him." The room went silent. Richard's face turned purple. "I did no such thing." Michael's death was an accident, a tragic accident. "Liar," Patricia whispered. Richard moved fast for a sick man. His hand cracked across Patricia's face, sending her sprawling to the floor. Daniel almost burst out of the closet, but something held him back. Leonard's expression. He was smiling, actually smiling, as he watched Richard lose control. Now, Leonard said mildly, helping Patricia to her feet. "That's no way to treat your wife, especially when she's trying to help you." He turned to Patricia. "You see what he is? You see what you've been protecting all these years? A murderer, a thief, a man who beats women." Patricia touched her split lip, blood on her fingers. She looked at Richard like she was seeing him for the first time. Or maybe seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "I want a divorce," she said. Richard laughed, a horrible, desperate sound. "You can't divorce me. I'm dying, remember? You told him that, didn't you?" He gestured at Leonard. "My loving wife, sharing my medical records with my enemies." "You're not dying fast enough," Patricia said coldly. Richard's face went blank with shock, then rage. He lunged at her again, but this time Leonard didn't stop him. He let Richard's hands close around Patricia's throat. Daniel couldn't stay hidden anymore. He burst out of the closet, throwing himself at Richard, pulling him off Patricia. The older man was surprisingly strong, fueled by fury and desperation. They crashed to the floor, Richard screaming, Daniel trying to pin him down without hurting him. Patricia was coughing, gasping for air, and Leonard just stood there, watching it all, with cold satisfaction. "Well," he said finally, "isn't this interesting?" Richard stopped struggling, staring up at Daniel with recognition dawning in his eyes. "You, Grace's boy, what are you doing here?" "Saving your wife's life," Daniel panted. "You're welcome." "He has the bonds," Leonard said conversationally. "Patricia gave them to him. The $2 million that was meant for Michael's heir. Isn't that right, Daniel?" Daniel froze. The folder was on the floor where he dropped it, bonds spilling out. Richard's eyes locked onto them. Then, onto Daniel. "Those belong to me. They belong to my father," Daniel said. "Michael Vance, the man you murdered." "I didn't murder anyone." Richard tried to stand, but couldn't. He was shaking, weak, and small. Nothing like the powerful man he'd been just 3 months ago. "Michael's death was an accident. I loved him like a brother." "You loved his money more," Leonard said. "Just admit it, Richard. After all these years, just tell the truth." "You want the truth?" Richard's voice cracked. "Fine. Yes, I was relieved when Michael died. He was going to destroy everything we'd built because he got self-righteous about some accounting irregularities. We could have fixed it quietly. But no, Michael wanted to go to the authorities. He wanted to burn it all down. So yes, when he died, I was relieved. And yes, I took what would have been his share of the company. But I didn't kill him. I wouldn't. I couldn't. Liar, Leonard said softly. I'm not lying. Richard looked desperately at Patricia, at Daniel. You have to believe me. I've done terrible things. I've cheated, stolen, manipulated. I destroyed Grace's life, out of greed and fear. I kept her working here to assuage my guilt. I'm not a good man, but I'm not a murderer. Daniel wanted to believe him. Despite everything, some part of him wanted to believe that the man whose life he'd saved wasn't a cold-blooded killer. But Leonard was pulling something out of his jacket. A gun. This has gone on long enough, he said calmly, pointing it at Richard. Daniel, give me the bonds. No, Daniel said. Leonard turned the gun on Patricia. Give me the bonds, or I kill her. You're going to kill us anyway, Patricia said, touching her bruised throat. I can see it in your eyes. This was always your plan. Not all of you, Leonard said. Just Richard. He's dying anyway. I'm just speeding things along. The rest of you can walk away. Daniel gets the bonds. Grace gets her freedom. Patricia gets her divorce. And Richard gets exactly what he deserves. Justice? Richard laughed bitterly. Death, Leonard corrected. Daniel's mind raced. Leonard was right. Richard was dying anyway. And he was a terrible person who destroyed lives without remorse. Did he really deserve Daniel's protection? But then, Daniel looked at Patricia, bleeding and bruised, looked at the gun in Leonard's hand, looked at the madness in Leonard's eyes. This wasn't justice. This was revenge. And revenge never ended. If Leonard killed Richard, he'd kill Patricia to silence her. Maybe kill Daniel and Grace, too, to tie up loose ends. Daniel had to make a choice. Right now, save the man who destroyed his family, or let him die and hope Leonard kept his word. I'll give you the bonds, Daniel said slowly, but only if you let everyone walk away. No one dies today. Leonard considered this. Acceptable. Give them to me. Daniel picked up the folder, holding his father's legacy in his hands. $2 million. His future. His mother's freedom. He was about to hand it over when the sitting room door crashed open for the second time. Grace stood there, breathing hard like she'd been running. And behind her, 2 police officers. That's him, Grace said, pointing at Leonard. That's the man who's been threatening my son. Leonard's face went blank with shock. Then rage. He swung the gun toward Grace. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. He threw himself in front of his mother as the gun went off. The sound was deafening in the small room. Patricia screamed. Richard shouted. The police drew their weapons. And Daniel felt fire explode in his shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to the floor. Through the haze of pain, he heard more gunshots, heard Leonard cry out, heard his mother screaming his name, heard Richard Ashford, the man he'd saved twice now, crawling across the floor toward him, pressing his hands against Daniel's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Stay with me, boy, Richard was saying, tears streaming down his face. Stay with me. Don't you die. Don't you dare die in my house. And Daniel, bleeding out on the floor of the mansion where he'd grown up invisible, finally understood something important. This was never about justice or revenge or money. It was about breaking cycles, about choosing who you become despite what you've suffered. His father had died trying to do the right thing. His mother had survived by protecting her son. And now, Daniel had a choice about what his legacy would be. But first, he had to survive. The world was going dark around the edges. His mother's face swam into view, crying, telling him to hold on. The last thing Daniel saw before everything went black was Leonard Vance lying on the floor across from him, bleeding from his chest, the gun fallen from his hand. Their eyes met for just a second, and Leonard smiled. Like this was exactly what he'd wanted all along. Then, nothing. Daniel woke up 3 days later in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and fear. His shoulder was wrapped in bandages, his arm in a sling, and every breath felt like knives in his chest. But he was alive. His mother sat in the chair beside his bed, asleep with her head on the mattress, her hand clutching his. She looked exhausted, her hair unwashed, her clothes the same ones she'd been wearing that day. She hadn't left his side. "Mom," Daniel whispered. Grace's eyes flew open. "Daniel! Oh, thank God. Thank God." She burst into tears, kissing his hand over and over. "You scared me so much. The doctor said the bullet missed your artery by 2 millimeters. 2 millimeters between life and death." "What happened? Where's Leonard? Where's Leonard?" "Leonard Vance is dead," a voice said from the doorway. Richard Ashford stood there, looking somehow even worse than he had 3 days ago. Thinner, grayer, like death was sitting on his shoulder, waiting patiently. But his eyes were clear. "The police shot him when he aimed at Grace," Richard continued, walking slowly into the room. "He died before the ambulance arrived, and with him died most of the answers we were looking for." Grace stiffened at Richard's presence, but she didn't leave. Instead, she stood up and faced him directly, for the first time in 19 years. "Get out," she said quietly. "You're not welcome here." "I know," Richard said, "but I need to say something. Both of you need to hear it." He paused, struggling with words. "Leonard Vance destroyed my life. He's been destroying it for 20 years, and I never even knew it." "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked. Richard pulled out a folder different from the others, filled with police reports and photographs. After the shooting, the FBI searched Leonard's home and office. They found everything. Evidence he'd been hiding for 2 decades. He handed the folder to Daniel. Inside were shocking documents. Emails, bank records, and a confession. A detailed, handwritten confession. From Gregory Thornton. Daniel's hands shook as he read. Gregory worked for Leonard? "For 20 years, Richard said, his voice hollow. "Leonard recruited him right after Michael died, planted him in my company, spent 2 decades having him sabotage me from the inside. The fraud, the embezzlement, the stolen money, all of it was Leonard's plan. Gregory was just the weapon." Grace gasped. "Why? Why would he do that?" "Because I didn't kill Michael," Richard said, looking directly at her. "Leonard did." The room went silent. Richard sat down heavily, like the weight of the truth was crushing him. Michael found out about real crimes. Leonard was committing money laundering through his law firm. Connections to organized crime. Michael was going to report his own father to the authorities. So Leonard had him killed, made it look like an accident, and then convinced everyone, including himself, that I was responsible. "That's impossible," Grace whispered. "Leonard loved Michael." "Leonard loved control more," Richard said. The police found his journals, 20 years of entries, documenting his obsession. He couldn't accept that his son chose morality over family loyalty. So he rewrote the story in his mind, made me the villain, and spent 2 decades destroying me piece by piece. Daniel felt sick. The bearer bonds. He wanted them for himself, not just the bonds. Everything. My reputation, my company, my life. He wanted me to lose everything Michael would have built, then die alone and disgraced. But his real masterpiece? Richard's voice cracked. He wanted me to believe I deserved it, to live with false guilt for 20 years, never knowing I was innocent. Grace was crying silently. Michael was going to turn in his own father? According to the journals, they had a terrible fight the night before Michael died. Michael said he couldn't be silent about his father's crimes. Leonard begged him to reconsider. When Michael refused, Richard trailed off. Leonard hired someone to cut the brake lines. Professional job. Untraceable. At least it was untraceable. Until the mechanic confessed on his deathbed last year. Leonard kept the confession. I think part of him wanted to get caught. Wanted someone to finally know the truth. Daniel's head was spinning. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd been told, it was all lies, built on lies. If Leonard killed my father, why did he let my mother live? Daniel asked. Richard looked at Grace with something that might have been respect. Because she was the perfect witness. Young, scared, pregnant, and completely under his control. He paid her off, threatened her, and then convinced her that working for me was the safest option. That way, he could watch both of you. Make sure you never discovered the truth. And you let him, Grace said bitterly. You knew I was being manipulated, and you just watched. I didn't know, Richard said quietly. I swear to you, Grace, I thought you signed those papers willingly. I thought you blamed me for Michael's death and wanted nothing more to do with the company. Leonard told me you were too grief-stricken to fight for your rights. I believed him. He paused. I was a fool. A greedy, selfish fool. But not a murderer. Grace stared at him for a long moment. You still stole from us. You still destroyed our lives. Yes, Richard agreed. I did. And I can never make that right. But I can try. He pulled out another folder. These are transfer documents. The bearer bonds belong to Daniel, legally and morally. I'm also establishing a trust fund everything I have left after the debts are settled. It's not much. Maybe $200,000 once everything is liquidated. But it's yours. Compensation for 19 years of work Grace was never properly paid for. Grace took the documents with shaking hands. Why now? Because you're dying? Because I finally understand what Michael was trying to teach me 20 years ago. That there are things more important than money. Like truth. Like redemption. Like making sure history doesn't repeat itself. Richard looked at Daniel. You saved my life twice. You didn't have to. After everything my family did to yours, you still chose kindness. That's worth more than $17 million ever was. Daniel didn't know what to say. This man had destroyed his family, but he hadn't killed his father. He'd been selfish and greedy, but not evil. Just human. Flawed and broken and trying. Too late to do the right thing. What happens now? Daniel asked. Now the FBI finishes their investigation. Gregory's confession clears me of most of the fraud charges. I'll still lose everything. Too many legitimate debts. Too many real mistakes. But I won't go to prison. And more importantly, the truth about Michael will finally come out. He'll be remembered as a hero who stood up to corruption, even when it cost him everything. Richard stood up slowly. Like every movement hurt. I'm going into hospice next week. The cancer is moving faster than expected. Patricia and I are divorcing. She deserves a fresh start without the weight of my mistakes. And this mansion will be sold to pay creditors. He walked to the door, then paused. Grace, I can never apologize enough for what I did to you, for what I allowed to happen. You deserved so much better. Grace didn't respond. She just held her son's hand and watched Richard leave, possibly for the last time. After he was gone, she turned to Daniel. Do you believe him? Daniel thought about it. The journals, the confession, the evidence, it all fit together in a horrible, tragic way. I think Leonard Vance was very good at making people believe lies, Daniel said slowly, including lies about themselves. Richard believed he was a ruthless businessman who'd earned his fortune fairly. Leonard believed he was avenging his son's murder. Gregory believed he was serving justice. And we believed we were victims of Richard's cruelty. We were victims, Grace said. Of Leonard's cruelty, Daniel corrected. Richard was just the weapon Leonard used. Like Gregory, like all of us. Grace was quiet for a long time. Your father died because he tried to do the right thing. Tried to stop his own father from breaking the law. And it got him killed. But his legacy didn't die, Daniel said, looking at the bearer bonds, the trust documents, the truth finally revealed. We're here. We survived. And now, we get to choose what happens next. What do you want to happen? Daniel thought about Leonard's smile as he lay dying. That final expression of satisfaction, like everything had gone according to plan. Like even in death, he'd won. But he hadn't won, because Daniel was alive. Grace was alive. And the truth was finally out. I want to finish my education, Daniel said. Become an engineer, like I always planned. Use this money to build something good instead of destroying something bad. Break the cycle. Grace smiled through her tears. Your father would be so proud of you. Both my fathers, Daniel said, surprising himself. Michael gave me life, and left me the means to build a future. But you raised me, taught me kindness when the world showed you cruelty, taught me strength when everything tried to break you. You're my real hero, Mom." They held each other, crying and healing, and slowly releasing 20 years of pain. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Richard went into hospice care, his condition deteriorating rapidly. Patricia visited Daniel once, bringing flowers and a genuine apology. She donated most of her remaining money to charities supporting single mothers and children in poverty. She said it felt like washing blood off her hands. The media had a field day with the story. Murdered heir, corrupt lawyer, decades-long conspiracy. But Grace and Daniel refused all interviews. They'd spent enough time being invisible. They didn't need to be famous, too. Daniel was released from the hospital after 2 weeks. His shoulder would heal, though he'd always have a scar. A reminder of the day he chose to save his mother instead of letting revenge consume him. The bearer bonds were converted to cash, $2.3 million after taxes and fees. The trust fund Richard established added another $180,000. Grace cried when she saw the numbers. More money than she'd ever imagined having. "What do we do with it?" she asked Daniel. "Whatever you want, Mom. It's your money as much as mine." Grace thought about it for a long time. Then she smiled. "I want to open a scholarship fund for children of domestic workers, kids who grew up invisible, like you did. Give them a chance to be seen." "The Michael Vance Memorial Scholarship," Daniel said. "And the Grace Miller Scholarship," she added. "Michael started the fight against corruption, but I survived it. That counts for something, too." They set up the fund together, working with lawyers to ensure it would continue long after they were gone. The first recipients would be announced next fall. 50 students, full rides to college, chosen not for their grades, but for their character, for their kindness, despite hardship. 1 month after the shooting, Daniel received a call from Patricia. Richard had taken a turn for the worse. He was asking to see Daniel one last time. Daniel almost said no. He'd forgiven Richard, but that didn't mean he wanted to watch him die. But Grace squeezed his hand. "Go! Let him have peace." So Daniel went to the hospice center, walking through quiet hallways that smelled like flowers, trying to cover the scent of death. Richard was barely recognizable. The cancer had consumed him, leaving behind a skeleton wrapped in gray skin. But his eyes were alert when Daniel entered. "You came," Richard whispered. "I came. I don't have long. Hours, maybe. But I needed to tell you something." Richard struggled to sit up, and Daniel helped him, adjusting pillows. "Leonard's final revenge wasn't destroying my company or my reputation. It was making me waste 20 years feeling guilty for something I didn't do, while never feeling guilty enough for what I actually did. I don't understand. I didn't kill Michael, but I did destroy your mother's life. I did steal your inheritance. I did choose greed over decency, again and again." Richard's voice was fading. "Leonard wanted me to suffer for a crime I didn't commit. But the real tragedy is that I should have been suffering for the crimes I did commit. And I never did. Not until now." "You're suffering now," Daniel said quietly. "Yes, but not enough. Not nearly enough to balance the scales." Richard grabbed Daniel's hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something. Promise you'll be better than me. Better than Michael. Better than Leonard. Promise you'll use that money to build instead of destroy. I promise. And promise you'll forgive your mother for her weakness. She did the best she could in an impossible situation. There's nothing to forgive. She's the strongest person I know." Richard smiled, a real smile this time. "You're a good son. Michael would have been proud." He paused, breathing heavily. "Can I tell you a secret? Something I never told anyone?" "Okay. Michael and I used to talk about changing the world, making it better, fairer, kinder. We were going to build affordable housing, create jobs for people who needed them. Use our success to lift others up." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "But I got seduced by penthouses and sports cars and the feeling of being powerful. I forgot the dream. Michael never did. That's why his father killed him. Not because Michael was going to expose corruption, because Michael refused to become corrupt himself." "You could have made different choices," Daniel said. "Yes, I could have. But I didn't. And that's the only thing that matters in the end. Not intentions, not potential, just choices. Richard's breathing was getting shallower. Make good choices, Daniel, even when they're hard. Especially when they're hard. I will. Richard closed his eyes. Thank you for saving my life. Twice. I didn't deserve it. Everyone deserves kindness, Daniel said. That's what my mother taught me. Richard's hand went slack in Daniel's grip. The heart monitor began to slow. Daniel sat with him until the end, holding the hand of a man who'd destroyed his family, but who'd also, in his final days, tried to make things right. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Richard Ashford died at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, with his victim's son holding his hand, forgiving him for crimes he did commit while clearing his name of crimes he didn't. The funeral was small. Patricia was there, a handful of business associates who remembered the good times. And, surprisingly, Grace and Daniel. They didn't cry. They didn't speak. They just stood in the back, witnesses to the end of a complicated, tragic story. Afterward, Patricia approached them. Thank you for coming. It seemed right, Grace said. I'm moving to California, starting over. I'm 52 years old, and I've never actually lived my own life. Time to try. Patricia smiled sadly. What about you two? Daniel starts at MIT in the fall, Grace said proudly. Engineering program. Full scholarship, he earned that himself. The money we have is for later, for building something meaningful. And you? I'm going back to school too. Social work degree. I want to help people like me, people who get trapped in bad situations and don't know how to escape. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. You're both so strong. Stronger than I ever was. You were strong enough to tell the truth in the end, Daniel said. That counts. Patricia hugged them both, then walked away to start her new life. Grace and Daniel stood together in the cemetery, looking at Richard's fresh grave next to the plot, where he'd someday be joined by Patricia, despite their divorce. They decided that together, before the end, 29 years of marriage, deserved that much. Do you think he found peace? Grace asked. Daniel thought about Richard's final words, his confession, his apology. I think he found truth. Maybe that's close enough. They walked back to their car, a modest used Honda, because even with millions in the bank, they remembered what it was like to have nothing. Mom, Daniel said as they drove away, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you wish things had turned out differently? If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still sign those papers Leonard forced on you? Grace was quiet for a long time. If I hadn't signed them, Leonard would have killed me. You would never have been born. So no, I wouldn't change anything. Because everything I suffered, every terrible choice I was forced to make, led to you. And you're worth more than all the money in the world. Daniel felt tears on his cheeks. I'm going to make you proud, Mom. I'm going to build something amazing with the life you gave me. You already have, Grace said, smiling. You saved lives. You chose kindness over revenge. You forgave when you could have destroyed. That's more amazing than any building you'll ever engineer. They drove home through the streets of New York, past the mansion that would soon belong to someone else, past the diner where Grace had worked herself to exhaustion, past all the places that held their pain. But ahead of them stretched new roads, new possibilities, new choices. Daniel thought about his father, Michael, who died trying to do the right thing. He thought about Richard, who'd spent 20 years doing the wrong thing before finally choosing truth. He thought about Leonard, who'd let revenge poison his entire life until it destroyed him. And he thought about his mother, who'd survived impossible circumstances with grace and dignity and love. Mom, he said softly. Yes, sweetheart? Thank you. For everything. For protecting me. For teaching me kindness. For showing me that strength isn't about power or money. It's about choosing love, even when the world gives you every reason to choose hate. Grace reached over and squeezed his hand. That's what mothers do. We love our children enough to break cycles, to end patterns of pain, to make sure the next generation has a better story than we did. And fathers? Daniel asked, thinking of Michael. Fathers, too, Grace said. Your father died, so you could live in a world with a little more justice. That's the greatest gift a parent can give. Daniel looked at the bearer bonds sitting in the envelope on his lap. $2 million. His father's final gift. His legacy. But the real legacy wasn't money. It was the choice to stand up for what's right, even when it costs everything. The choice to protect your children at any price. The choice to forgive when you could destroy. The choice to build when you could burn it all down. I'm going to make both of them proud, Daniel said. Michael and Richard. One gave me life, the other taught me what not to become. Both lessons matter. Then they didn't die for nothing, Grace said. They drove into the sunset, leaving behind the mansion, the graves, the pain. Ahead of them, MIT. The scholarship fund. Lives changed by kindness. A future built on truth instead of lies. The billionaire had lost everything, his money, his reputation, his life. But the poor maid's son had gained something far more valuable. He'd learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in choices, in character, in the legacy of kindness you leave behind. Richard Ashford died with $17 million worth of debt and no friends. Daniel Miller would live with $2 million worth of opportunity and a mother who taught him that love is the only currency that really matters. And in the end, that made all the difference. 3 years later, Daniel stood at a podium in MIT's engineering building, addressing the first graduating class of the Michael Vance Memorial Scholars. 50 students who'd grown up invisible, like he had. 50 students who'd been given a chance to be seen. His mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride. My father died fighting corruption, Daniel told the graduates. My mother survived impossible circumstances through sheer will and love, and I almost died choosing kindness over revenge. Each of those experiences taught me something important. Your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do. The students listened intently. They knew his story. It had been in the news, in books, in documentaries, but hearing it from him made it real. You're all here because someone believed you deserved a chance. Now it's your turn to give someone else that chance. Build businesses that employ people who need work. Design buildings that house people who need shelter. Create technologies that solve problems for people who need solutions. Be the billionaires who don't forget where they came from. After the ceremony, a young woman approached him. She looked nervous but determined. Mr. Miller? I'm Jessica Reeves, first-generation college student, daughter of a janitor. This scholarship changed my life. What are you going to do with your degree? Daniel asked. I'm going to build affordable housing, Jessica said, using sustainable materials and innovative design to make homes people can actually afford, like your father wanted to do. Daniel felt tears in his eyes. He would have loved that. Will you help me? Jessica asked. I have ideas but no capital, no connections, just dreams. Daniel thought about Richard Ashford, who'd had all the capital and connections in the world but had lost his dreams along the way. He thought about his father, who died before his dreams could become reality. And he thought about his mother, who dreamed of nothing more than keeping her son alive and safe, and who'd succeeded against impossible odds. Yes, Daniel said, I'll help you. That's what this is all about. Passing it forward, breaking cycles, making sure the next generation doesn't have to fight as hard as we did. Jessica smiled, and Daniel saw the future in her eyes. A better future, a kinder future. The billionaire had lost everything, but the poor maid's son had found something worth more than any fortune. He'd found purpose, and that, in the end, was the most unthinkable thing of all. Not revenge, not destruction, not even justice, but redemption for everyone, even those who didn't deserve it, especially those who didn't deserve it. Because that's what kindness does. It redeems the irredeemable. It saves the unsavable. It transforms tragedy into triumph, one choice at a time. And as Daniel watched Jessica walk away to change the world, he knew his father was finally at peace. The fight against corruption hadn't ended with Michael's death. It had only just begun.